I'm Kim Belair, and I'm the co-founder of a little narrative development company called Sweet Baby Inc. We still look at our core demographics and say, okay, they're white, cis, hetero males, and we cater almost exclusively to them. And the problem is that we don't just cater to them like, you know, here's something that we think you'll enjoy. We cater to them the way that we cater to like a picky baby.
I don't know, that sounds kind of racist. Our primary audience is white men, and they're a bunch of babies. I'm supposed to want to learn about diversity and inclusion from a person who began her speech by insulting my demographic? Who exactly are you trying to convince here?
And they make us scared to deviate from what we actually want to do, just in case these picky babies don't want to play our games. And we cannot continue to try to create art under a system that is going to bar innovation for fear of a picky baby throwing a tantrum.
Oh, so now I'm a whiny baby throwing a tantrum because I don't want to buy a game that developers made purely to shout their political agenda at me. I don't get it. Is this like quirky racism? Our white customers are a bunch of picky babies who don't want to play our games, so we named our company Sweet Baby Inc. to highlight all the good customers who eat their vegetables and accept the DEI propaganda. How's that working out for you guys? Let's see. This Kim Belair speech is from GDC 2019, and well, at GDC 2024, this moment was trending. That's enough of that. So this was a protest. But what were they protesting, you ask? Layoffs. I'm not kidding. This IGN article says that they were unhappy about layoffs in an industry that is constantly making stuff that people don't want and telling gamers, if you don't like it, don't buy it. Okay, fine with me. If you're going to destroy fan-favorite properties, put political cringe in your video games that nobody wants, and purposefully make characters way uglier than the actors who modeled them, so they have more realistic body types, then we won't buy your games and you can have fun finding some other kind of employment. I mean, how do you go from this person on the left to the character model on the right? Some people were saying that this main character from Star Wars Outlaws looks like that guy from Twin Peaks. Not a great look for a company that wants to use manufactured consent to trick people out of owning their video games. It's like these companies are screaming for people to pirate their stuff. That being said, it's no secret that games have been changing over the years. It started out with programmers treating their players like dumb children. That was pointed out over a decade ago in the series Sequelitis, and it seems like that change largely had to do with designers being lazy by saying read the manual for every move, instead of intelligently designing fun challenges in the game that show you how it works. And I also think that the change was even more so to appease video game journalists that review their games, who can't even beat the tutorial on Cuphead, or properly use the most basic aspects of the magic system in one of the most well-known games of all time. Seriously, this person is a lead editor for a gaming news outlet. How did you get that job if you're worse at video games than a below-average player? So we have stuff like that, and now more recently, game developers have been trying to force-feed political messaging into video games, and that's where companies like Sweet Baby Inc. come in. Sweet Baby Inc. is a consulting firm that helps game designers make their games more diverse and inclusive to help boost representation. And it's not the only one. There's like a bunch of them like Weird Ghost, Silver String Media, and Hit Detection. A lot of them seem to be based in Canada for some reason. But as for Sweet Baby Inc., their stated goal is to make representation not about mitigating pain, but instead to create moments of joy.
And that means that we feel daunted when we discuss representation because we talk a lot about representation as the mitigation of pain, but we don't talk about representation as a creator of joy.
Gee, I wonder why that is. Nobody seemed to care about mitigating pain when it came to Static Shock, or Blade, or Spawn, or Mortal Kombat, or both Left 4 Dead games, or Barrett, or Saz, or Halo, nor have black people in general traditionally had problems with connecting to shows with no black characters. Nobody of the main cast in Dragon Ball is black, yet black people love that show. No black characters in Super Smash Bros., but it's still well loved in the black community. Hell, do you have any idea how popular Asian culture and martial arts films like Bruce Lee movies are in the black community? So why is it that all of a sudden seeing people of color being represented in media is viewed as a chore like eating vegetables?
If you're a creative working in AAA, which I did for many, many years, put this stuff up to your higher-ups. And if they don't see the value in what you're asking for when you ask for consultants, when you ask for research, go have a coffee with your marketing team and just terrify them with the possibility of what's going to happen if they don't give you what you want. Because they have to consider, like, I say that out as a joke, but it's actually very, very true, because if you start to consider the people who are player and audience facing and who have to deal with mitigating harm and with keeping the sentiment around their game and their project positive, there's like a genuine value that you can impress upon them with both ethically and financially. You can say this is important.
Wow, that sounds a lot like a threat, particularly when it's not rooted in reality, considering that the player-facing staff in these big companies have been getting ridiculed by the changes that businesses like yours make. So it sounds a lot like you're threatening video game companies with negative press, so you can force them to create ugly women, which is something that no player wants, whether they are male or female. It's not about creating women with realistic body types. These characters don't even look like women. Well, maybe there's a reason for that. Allegedly, there was a leak from a Naughty Dog employee saying that they're making women look like men to not offend trans people. It makes sense if that's true. But who are all these people that Kim Belair is so afraid of? This DEI stuff fails constantly, so why would anyone care? I think I have an answer. Remember 10 years ago when Feminist Frequency and the Anita Sarkeesian types basically captured a huge portion of the gaming industry? Well, if you didn't go along with their politics or went against them, they would basically send Twitter hate mobs after you.
So you Feminist Frequency people out there who have engaged in your own harassment against me, who have gotten me blacklisted in this industry, who have basically made people afraid to support me because it crosses your ire, and they don't want that. They don't want the trouble of treating me like a human being because you have sent up the flares in this damn industry that anybody opposes you is subhuman and bad for women. You actually cause people to be shunned in this industry. People deny me interviews and don't want me covering their product because I am anti-feminist frequency. Not because people who think you're right, but because they're afraid. Okay, everybody is afraid of getting spanked by the feminist frequency paddle because that is a rallying cry to the Twitter mobs.
That was from a feminist who does not like feminist frequency, and the great thing is that the bullying that the Anita Sarkeesian types used to perpetrate doesn't work on Twitter anymore since Elon took over. I'm not saying Twitter is perfect, it certainly is not, but since Elon took over and fired a ton of the old staff, the woke SJW cancel mobs have been incredibly absent. Remember how they tried to cancel Hogwarts Legacy because they said that J.K. Rowling is a transphobe? It didn't work. Hogwarts Legacy was one of the best-selling games of 2023. Now that Twitter isn't owned by a bunch of political radicals, public opinion can be reflected more accurately, and the public hates this crap. Has Bud Light recovered yet? They've had like a year of horrendous sales. What's going to happen to Planet Fitness? So none of this is reflective of what people actually want, which is why you have to force it down their throats.
Next, if you're in communications or you're part of that like scared marketing group, assume your players want new stories and treat representation as a facet of innovation, as a selling point. Leverage your game's ability to explore new perspectives.
But you diversity and inclusion people aren't doing that. You're using companies like Sweet Baby Inc. and Black Gamer Girls to make narrative changes to fan-favorite games like Final Fantasy VII, which results in things like randomly adding like 1 million black people to it that weren't in the original game, or randomly adding gay couples everywhere that weren't originally there, or randomly making characters female that weren't originally female. The vast majority of what these people call representation or innovation is just tokenization.
Did you not take sloppy seconds of a pre-existing character for your diversity agenda? Oh, representation. You'll take the scraps of the white characters and then claim that you've made it. But we don't want to talk about that, clearly, right? We don't want to, no. That's anti-black of me to point out.
You're not actually creating a positive representation of black people by doing this. You're just pretending to do that, which is the literal definition of tokenism. And the stupid thing is that when it comes to Final Fantasy VII, there was already good black representation in the original game. There was already gay and trans representation in the original game. And there were already strong and independent women in the original game. Not that any of these people would know stuff like that because they don't actually play any of the source material or fact-check things before they write their articles. Certainly not a games journalist. I'd love a black Final Fantasy character that isn't just comic relief, and it shows a picture of Barrett. Are you kidding? Barrett has the darkest backstory in that game. For those of you who are playing Rebirth and don't want spoilers, I won't say it out loud, but anyone else can read Lofty's summary on screen. Barrett is an actual example of good representation and probably has the most interesting backstory out of all the characters, yet these activist gaming journalists are still crapping on it, which is why I think that this guy here, Jervon Perkins, hasn't actually played the game, or he's just grifting. So I have a lot of trouble believing that there isn't some other agenda behind all this, outside of representation.
You now make a point of, that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. you have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year. And what we're doing internally is, if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted, okay?
We're doing the same thing.
And so it's just, you have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said.
I love the PR speak here. If you don't force a bunch of diversity in your games, then you will be impacted. Stop using euphemisms, because what you actually mean is that you're going to financially bully companies into compliance by withholding loans if they don't align with your politics. These days, they're force-feeding this crap down our throats so much that you can't even buy Advil without some stupid political messaging. But there is so much diversity and inclusion in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that it is straight up distracting. Look at this. This is from the Cosmo Canyon area that is clearly based on Native American settlements in places like Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. Well, instead of seeing reality reflected in the game like all these DEI people claim they want to do, the first person you see in this part of the game is a plus-size black woman who owns a ranch. This is like Native American stolen valor. Then you walk into a small settlement and you see like 15 different races in one town. This might make sense in places in the game like Midgar or Junon because those are massive cities, but Cosmo Canyon is in the middle of nowhere. There should pretty much be only one race here, which is what they did in the original game, and you can see they're Native Americans. Even more ridiculous, the Gongaga Forest, which is the area that comes immediately before Cosmo Canyon, is obviously based on Mayan and Aztec culture, and also is in an isolated area. So you might expect to see people who look like Mexicans or Native Americans because that's who is indigenous to that area. Nope, there's like 3 times as many black people as there are anyone who looks remotely Latino. I wonder if that heavy overrepresentation had anything to do with Square Enix working with a group called Black Girl Gamers. So I don't believe you guys are trying to boost positive representation of minorities or reflect reality when you basically stole representation from Mexicans and Native Americans to disproportionately promote black people. And I also don't think you're trying to do anything innovative or creatively interesting here. You're just trying to ruin beloved properties by saying stuff like, the Force is female, instead of making your own original material.
How does it feel to have lived long enough to see all of your favorite franchises go down in flames?
Feels great.
Going back to what Kim said about innovation, the ironic part is that if they were actually good writers, and not just a bunch of diversity hires driven by radical politics, then they would have a booming opportunity to create interesting stories. Things that are unknown or are mysterious drive interest. Mystery creates entertainment. That's why people don't want spoilers. They don't want the mystery removed from the story. So if I've only watched white people movies, then the most entertaining thing to do is not take a white character out of an old franchise and make him black. It's to instead take a part of black culture or Asian culture or Latino culture and create a story out of that is new to the audience. This is literally a golden opportunity for an original story, yet all these people do is latch onto an existing property that someone else made, change everyone's races, make all the women ugly, insert a pride flag, preach some political garbage about how they don't like capitalism, do as much as they can to crap on the source material, and create boring Mary Sue characters. These people have such a disrespect for the material that originally attracted fans that all they do is talk about how much of an inconvenience it is, even in front of someone who enjoyed it.
Speaking to Aaron, he was saying that out of the two of you, you were the bigger gamer. You were more into the game than him. Jonah himself, he played a lot of it. Was that a complete waste of time, or did that feel like you were kind of prepping for the show?
It wasn't a waste of time at all. I wanted to get the absolute most out of this experience, and I think you have to deeply, deeply respect the source material, at least for me, and I love to throw myself into all of my research, but this was so fun. There's so much lore and so much passion behind the games and so many details, and it made it even more exciting when I put the Volt suit on or the Pip-Boy for the first time. Like, that moment was not lost on me. What a big deal that was.
I know nothing about Fallout outside of that remix, but I can certainly appreciate that finally someone who is not Henry Cavill or Ryan Reynolds is openly saying that they like the source material. Anyway, Sweet Baby Inc. and a bunch of other companies like it have been around for a while in the background. Until recently, only a few small channels had reported on them, And the straw that broke the camel's back on the Sweet Baby Inc. situation was this list here created by a Brazilian gamer named Cabrutus that cataloged every game that Sweet Baby Inc. had worked on. Normally, you would call this free promotion. In Kim Belair's words, someone talking about your work should be a moment of joy, especially considering that this list currently has a lot of followers. However, since Sweet Baby Inc. is not actually acting in good faith, they don't want the players knowing they've been involved in a project, so a person named Chris Kindred led a targeted harassment campaign against the Brazilian person of color who created this list and tried to get his Steam count deleted. Not only is this anti-free speech and technically an attack on an oppressed group by their definition, I can imagine that it's also borderline illegal because effectively if you delete his account, you delete all the games he's purchased, which sounds kind of a lot like stealing. This is why I buy physical copies of most of my games. You don't actually own any of the games that you digitally download. The ironic part here is that Cabrutus, the creator of the list, and who, again, is a person of color, didn't really have to do any investigative journalism to make this list. All he did was pull the list off Sweet Baby Inc.'s website. And the reason why a list like this is so effective in the current day is because players are tired of companies screwing them over with things like censorship patches that go back and change the game that you paid for or expected to get because of how it was advertised. Players are also tired of day one bug patches, which is just a euphemism for, we're too cheap to check our games for bugs, so we're going to make the players beta test the game. And players are tired of anti-piracy software that overworks your PC or console and makes the game perform like crap, which effectively rewards pirated software, because people who pirate the game get a better experience.
Anyway, here's Minecraft running on the Switch through emulation. I've played a lot of Minecraft on the Switch, and the most disappointing thing about seeing this running in the way that I have it here is that it even runs better than it does under the official system. That is just sad. You should not be able to get an improved gaming experience by running an emulator that emulates the device that you are using to run the emulator. Here's the same game under the stock OS, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't even as bad as it can get because it's possible to get a de facto loading screen while you wait for the next chunk to load in.
So anyway, the Sweet Baby Inc. detected list became popular because of lists like this one. Speaking of activist cry-bullying not working anymore on Twitter, in response to Chris Kindred's brutally racist harassment campaign on a person of color who merely promoted a company, Twitter suspended his account. Then he came back, spit on Akira Toriyama's grave, and got suspended a second time. Again, these people are really underestimating how much black people like Dragon Ball. Also, Mr. Popo isn't blackface. He's a reference to an Indian god named Mahakala. Nice research, Chris. Now, of course, during this whole event, everyone's favorite gaming journalist platform Kotaku had to get involved with a reporter named Alyssa Mercante, who wrote this article saying, Sweet Baby Inc. does not do what gamers think it does, that no one believed, and one of the things that Alyssa Mercante is now known for is being the chick who invaded the Sweet Baby Inc. detected Discord and started asking questions like the worst FBI glowy trying to impersonate someone who is friendly to the group. Literally the Steve Buscemi meme. After she failed, and Kotaku management decided to have their staff start writing articles that actually requires them to play video games, Alyssa proclaimed on Twitter that she's going back to her career in sex work. You cannot make this shit up. Your job is to play video games, and you're saying that's too hard. Though I guess she would prefer to be busy writing stuff that requires no actual investigative work or research, like this opinion piece that probably took about 10 seconds to write about how she thought Aerith was a goat, because as a senior editor at a gaming journalism website, she never thought to play any of the games that Kingdom Hearts cameos are from. Being a gaming journalist and not even doing so much as merely watching the intro of a very popular game such as Final Fantasy VII is like calling yourself a movie reviewer when you haven't seen Star Wars. Why would you brag about being uninformed here? I'm not kidding about how bad this is. Aerith is the first character to show up in the game, and this clip here is referenced a lot in games media. Her ribbon falling off is the focal moment of a scene that, let's say, is a major plot point of the story. It's like not knowing that Darth Vader is Luke's father or that Sheik is Zelda.
That is Zelda?
Yeah.
Sheik is Zelda?
Yep.
No! That's such a crazy plot twist.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
There's so many times where I let it slip where I was like, there's Sheik, she's right there. He.
Wow, you actually did almost everything you could to blow that for me.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a fluke considering that Dan from Game Grumps had played Zelda games during his childhood, and the reason this moment hit really well 8 years ago is because it was so rare for someone to not know that Sheik is Zelda. However, Dan is not a senior editor of a gaming website who has at this point written multiple articles about Final Fantasy VII, despite never having played a Final Fantasy game, and despite being so out of the loop that she thought that Aerith was a Disney character until 2 months ago. And Alyssa grew up during the time period when everybody in the gaming industry was talking about this specific scene, so it's not like she doesn't know this because she's a Zoomer and it was before her time. I'm the Jon Snow of Final Fantasy. I know nothing. Well, considering how people feel about gaming journalists these days, that's probably not something that you should be bragging about. But I haven't even seen Game of Thrones, yet I still recognize the character Jon Snow because Game of Thrones is really popular. I even know about that one scene with that kid that everyone hates where he drinks some wine. When I was a kid, I struggled with the tutorial for Kingdom Hearts. Oh, I see. So it's like she was born to be a gaming journalist. Kingdom Hearts is notorious for being an easy game, even for an 11-year-old. Alyssa obviously barely qualifies as a casual gamer and probably got this job because she knew someone and has a related degree. So all of this begs the question of why are video game companies listening to a bunch of political ideologues who don't play games? Considering that Get Woke Go Broke is in full effect and these companies are losing tens of millions of dollars on these flops, none of this makes sense. Why do they keep making games that people have told them over and over again that they don't want to play? Why is the Pokemon company publicly releasing this flyer about how a video game for children needs more diversity, equity, and inclusion when all this drama against DEI is going on? It seems like a really stupid move for an intellectual property that basically prints free money for Nintendo. Well, to answer that, YouTuber The Quartering interviewed Kabrutus, the creator of the Sweet Baby Inc. Detected list, and World of Warcraft developer Mark Kern. Now, Mark is not on camera for this interview, so you won't be able to see him talking, but you can see his avatar on the bottom left corner. Here he is talking about the problem.
The way games are funded, you don't use your own money. Even EA, okay? Games are hugely expensive to make. They're upwards of, $250, sometimes $600 million. It's for certain live games. It's incredibly how expensive they are. And to do that, your CFO is your best friend. You're counting on your CFO to get you tax breaks, to get you in, to put studios in regions which are financially favorable, and you will borrow the cheap money. You will get as cheap money to do it. Even EA does this. I worked with EA. We were putting together a deal where they were taking bailout money from the banks in the last financial crisis that we had, and they were applying that cheap money towards games. Same thing with COVID money. They're applying that cheap money towards games. And what has been the cheapest money while interest rates were still low, a couple of years ago? It was ESG financing.
For the people who are uninitiated, ESG stands for Environmental Social Governance, which is a weird nonsense acronym that big banks use to give a sort of credit score for how in line certain companies are with the political views they want to push. One of the companies that does ESG is BlackRock, which is why I showed that clip earlier. It's clear they are trying to use ESG to financially incentivize businesses to promote a certain ideology, and they do that by throwing tons of money at them.
It's not just money. Like you pointed out, different regions will offer tax credits. And these things come with strings attached, all right?
Right.
Political strings attached. And one thing that, everyone needs to realize is that it's not that these studios are funding the games out of their own pocket. That would be very expensive for them. Cash is king. They will preferably go out and get money from other sources if it's cheap enough to help spread the risk of these massive titles. And there are funding deals out there for studios, and I can't get too specific. I don't want to out my sources, that have certain strings attached. Like a company will suddenly sign with a developer, and now that developer needs to hire a DEI director and needs to go out and hire consultancy firms to gender balance their staff. And what does all this do? It boosts their ESG score. It allows them access to that funding.
And this is why you have narrative consulting companies like Sweet Baby Inc., and why you have all these companies who are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. Their whole purpose is to figure out how to insert certain political messages into their games that companies like BlackRock and Vanguard like, so they can afford to make a $300 million game.
But it's still out there, and it's still fine. This is why you look at how could a studio agree to do this? How could they do something that's so financially devastating to their games? And it's because they're kind of in this situation where that's the money they can get. And so, you have this self-perpetuating machine, and I don't think, and that's why it's kind of a death spiral that I don't think you can really escape. The only way you can escape it is to make a good game. And if you're already reliant on ESG and you're already reliant on these other fundings because your games are too damn expensive to make, you're trapped.
Right. These gaming companies and Hollywood have become addicted to these incredibly expensive movies and games, so they make them woke and hire a bunch of DEI staff to afford it. How's that working out? Well, do you remember when Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny released and everyone hated it? That movie cost $295 million to make, and it made $384 million. That may sound like profit, but usually these movies will double the budget of the film to advertise, which puts the actual cost around $600 million, and means they lost about $100 to $200 million. The Sound of Freedom came out around the same time, and it cost about $14 million to make. It made almost $250 million. I don't know how much money they spent on advertising, but I think it's safe to assume that they made about 5 to 10 times their total budget. The makers of the latest Indiana Jones and all these post-Avengers failed superhero movies should note that nobody cares about how expensive the visual effects you put into a film are if the film isn't entertaining. It's the same with video games. I don't care how good the graphics are. If the gameplay isn't fun, then nobody's going to buy your game. 10 years ago, a game called Risk of Rain was made by essentially 3 people and a budget of $20,000, and it made around $3 million. The game cost me $10, and over the years, I've easily played it for hundreds of hours because it's so fun that it's addictive. It's easy to see why that game made money. Risk of Rain 2 had a similarly small budget compared to its profit, and it made around $58 million. These people aren't struggling to produce a profit. I can't tell you how many countless hours I've sunk into low-cost indie games, yet you get these massive games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that create these ridiculously unsustainable models that are incredibly financially stupid. Then they load the game with a ton of filler content and wonder why it's not selling that well. I'm surprised that no one saw this coming, especially after the horrendous job they did with Part 1, which probably owed a lot of its sales to COVID.
Final Fantasy VII Remake is actually the first 5 hours of Final Fantasy VII except 30 hours. What we have here is a Hobbit scenario where you take an established story and stretch it way out because of money. Look at this robot hand. In the PS1 version, I walked over the robot hand in 1 second. In the PS4 version, you have to take control of the robot hand, take your partner, put her up on the cliff, go switch to the other robot hand, pick up the box, oh, you put the box in the wrong spot, switch back, do it loop-de-loop, pick her up, put her down, wrong spot, switch characters, switch robots, insert disc 2. The great moments of this game are buried in a sea of filler hallways and elevators and levers and computers and platforming.
Rebirth is everything bad about Part 1 except twice as long. Why am I playing a ripoff of Fall Guys for an hour when in the original game, I would have been rewarded with this item in a treasure chest by exploring, which is something that's actually fun. Did we really need a knockoff Rocket League in this game? If I wanted to play Rocket League, then I would just play Rocket League, not a less good version of it. Speaking of Donkey, apparently this is a reoccurring problem that modern-day Square Enix has.
Kingdom Hearts 3 is one of the biggest glumberfucks I have ever witnessed. Never have I seen so much hard work wasted on a product so astonishingly bad. Gameplay-wise, there is an ambitious variety of playstyles with platforming sections, then it's a beat-em-up, then it's a shooter, then you're collecting 300 crabs, then it's a rhythm game, then you drive a pirate ship, then it's a Star Fox, then you play Puzzle Bobble with Winnie the Pooh. It doesn't do anything particularly well, but it does a lot of things.
This is terrible game design. So outside of Kingdom Hearts, why am I being forced to do this boring crap in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth instead of being pushed towards the battle system, which is actually fun, or being pushed towards exploring a world map where I'm not told exactly where everything is and literally guided to the exact spot if I'm somehow too stupid to read a world map with a waypoint on it? This one was just ridiculous. Not only do you have a mini-map on the top right in case you didn't know where to go, but you also have yellow paint, an action arrow, and a drawn sign on the wall saying, "Go here." I mean, at this point, I'm surprised that Square Enix didn't also add flashing lights and an auditory cue to let you know that you are most certainly in the right place. How stupid do you think your players are? Is being told exactly how to play the game supposed to be fun? What was the point in spending all that money coding this beautiful open world if you're just going to kill all of the mystery with waypoints that are basically on the map by default, and by making it so you can fast travel to every point, which results in players wanting to spend as little time as possible engaging with the expensive thing that you created? The world map in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is effectively designed as an inconvenience instead of it being a main draw for player engagement like it is in a Zelda game. The game would have been much better if the designers didn't hold the player's hand the entire time and just stuck to a few original minigames like Queen's Blood or Fort Condor instead of like 10 nonsense rip-off minigames per area that you aren't going to care about 2 minutes after you play them. I mean, they spread themselves so thin by making an excessive amount of minigames that they couldn't even keep the Chocobo racing game original without majorly ripping off Mario Kart. Well, at least they did such a crap job playtesting that game that they didn't remove your ability to basically cheat on every map that has a jump, which is like half the races, including some of the most difficult ones. The point being is that I think this kind of creatively lazy bloating and sidetracking that you can do when you have a massive budget, instead of focusing on a few very well-refined ideas, is hurting some of these more established companies and making games less fun. Good content requires that you cut out all the boring stuff, but because they are too irresponsible to cut down on the scope of the game to make it something they can actually afford to create, they have to talk to ESG companies like BlackRock or Vanguard to bankroll their project, who will then say, yes, but we need you to hire these consulting firms who are going to make players hate your game. I mean, this get woke, go broke stuff is so prominent now that eventually people are going to start saying, wait, BlackRock is taking my retirement money and putting it into woke projects that they know are going to fail? Maybe I should invest it elsewhere. And you should. Why would you trust your investments with a business that is using your money to spread an ideology that everyone hates and is resulting in failure after failure? And really, all these ESG companies are doing is taking people who are way more racist than the average person and having them lecture you about why racism is bad. Take former sex worker and senior editor at Kotaku, Alyssa Mercante, for example. She wrote this tweet here saying that you can't be racist against white people, and then immediately got ratioed and community noted into oblivion. You also have this tweet from some girl who's creating a game that nobody cares about, saying that none of the starting characters in their alpha build are white males, which technically isn't super racist if you add the nuance that you can still create white characters in the game. But also, anyone who's not a racist would not have bragged on Twitter that none of the starting characters are white. That thought wouldn't occur to a normal person. Imagine bragging that there were no black or Hispanic people in your starting lineup. Then there's this person, a former employee of Sweet Baby Inc. named Donnie Lalanders, who now works for Electronic Arts and openly bragged about violating civil rights law.
I have a team of 21 right now for Validate. It's a pretty big team. It's a crazy big team for indie games. But who is your team? Validate has a team of mostly all people of color. We have no white people on our team. I did that because I wanted to create a safe environment. And I know the best way for an environment to be safe is to be around people who are just like me. And I'm not saying that white people in the industry are creating unsafe environments. I'm not saying that. That is not what I'm saying. I am saying that sometimes it is hard to work with white people because they think that something made it okay, but it was really a microaggression. And no one wants to deal with that while they're trying to make a game that they love.
And because of all this, Gamergate 2 has been declared. The meme wars have started with AI depictions of how Sweet Baby Inc. would design Mario, or how IGN would create the Stellar Blade protagonist, and even the Daily Wire took a break from setting itself on fire to join Gamergate.
The video game industry, without a lot of fanfare, has transformed into a tool of both propaganda and surveillance. It's an effective way to indoctrinate children precisely because it hasn't received much attention, and also because children spend, many of them, hundreds of hours a year, and that might be an undercount, a severe undercount, with this kind of content. So it should get a lot of our attention. And now finally that attention is here. And it's yet another reason to keep these games as far away from your children as possible. And if you do that, games journalists, literally the lowest form of journalists on the planet, will accuse you of harassment. And that's exactly how you'll know that you're doing the right thing.
Nice try, Matt. No one believes that you care about video games after years of you saying stuff like video games and anime are demonic, which is fine, you can say those things, but don't go trying to grift off the audience who cares about that stuff because then people are just going to make fun of you for that. But Gamergate 2 is on, every YouTuber is capitalizing on the drama, and every air quote gaming journalist who can't figure out where to go without yellow paint and a guide arrow is trying to use this situation to enhance their Twitter following so they can work at the publication that they actually want to work for instead of Kotaku.
I want to be totally straightforward with you. You will never, in a million years, get a job at a publication as prestigious as the New York Times. That little pipe dream is never gonna happen. You will be blogging and tweeting until you are dead, and nobody will care. Because you're a blockhead, Joe. You don't pay attention in school, Joe.
I just having trouble hearing you.
Poor guy. It's life when you work at BuzzFeed.
Ironically, Joe the BuzzFeed journalist did get a position at the New York Times. However, when it comes to gaming journalists, I really think these companies are just going to collapse and they'll be out of a job because they aren't creating products that people want, and when they do try to create stuff that gamers want, like guides on how to play certain games better, the staff complains about having to do actual work. Have fun getting laid off because you'll never succeed in media if you don't create products that people want. Speaking of the last Gamergate, how's that going? Well, one of the most prominent figures in that movement and founder of the now dead company Feminist Frequency, Anita Sarkeesian, voluntarily posted what quite possibly is the most embarrassing photo that I've ever seen on her Instagram of her doing a fake wedding for what I believe was her 40th birthday. Now, normally I would say this is kind of sad and it's in poor taste to dunk on a political opponent when their life isn't going well, but Anita Sarkeesian has done some pretty evil things such as misappropriating a bunch of Kickstarter money, lying about a number of video games such as Hitman to make them seem worse than they were, and used Twitter to bully people into compliance.
I sort of joke about how it was the most liberating thing that ever happened to me and also the most frustrating for everyone around me. Because like when you start learning about systems, everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out to everyone all the time. So there's a good year of my life. There's a good year of my life where it was just I was the most obnoxious person to be around.
Yeah, you were annoying for quite a bit longer than a year on that one. But I'm not going to rehash all the crimes of Anita Sarkeesian here, whose ideology essentially helped ruin video games, because I already went into detail on that at the end of this video here, and there are plenty of videos that exist on the internet going over who she is as a person. Basically, she's kind of evil, which makes her failed dating life funny. And I will point out something that a lot of people have missed about this whole wedding post. Thanks to It's a Gundam, I've been notified of this photo here displaying that she probably was already in a relationship with a guy when she did this fake wedding. Now, you might say that this picture was just a part of the bit, but they are really close together for two people who aren't in a relationship. And here's another photo of them together. Honestly, if these two are together, then I can't think of anything more passive-aggressive and pathetic than throwing a fake wedding in place of a real one. Also, apparently this occurred in a different country from the one she lives in, and included a bachelor party, rehearsal dinner, and reception. This had to have been expensive to pull off just for a birthday party, which really shows that she made a lot of money off that feminist frequency grift.
The fact that challenging the status quo results in threats of violence and acts of violence is unbelievable. Right?
It probably was ever thus, though, wasn't it? I mean, that's what political activists throughout history have confronted, so it's not, in a way, it's not
new,
surprising.
But that's also horrifying. Right? Like that's still the response to saying something like, hey, maybe you should tone down the boobs in your game. Like, right? Like that should not be a statement that leads me to 3 years of death threats and bomb threats and all kinds of things.
Quit with the gaslighting. That's not why people don't like you. Now, the issue here is that a lot of these people come up with reasonable concerns, but then they move towards the craziest narrative to respond to a problem. For example, I remember going to LA Comic-Con maybe 10 plus years ago, and they had a cosplay is not consent panel, a panel that talked about how it's not okay for men to grope or creep on women just because they're dressed like their favorite comic book character, which should be something that every normal person agrees with. The issue with this panel is that they then proceeded to go on some insane rant about how women have unrealistic body standards to live up to simply because the characters are thin, while completely ignoring how many shirtless alpha male characters there are in media with a body type that literally cannot be achieved without steroids. But even with stupid, one-sided points like that, that's not to say that the unrealistic standards for women argument came from nowhere, because that was something that they used to be correct about. Moments like this next one from America's Top Model, which aired in the 2000s, created the necessity for body positivity.
Hi, Anna. Hello. How do you feel about being the only plus-size model here? I'm sure of myself, and, that's who I am, so that's fine.
It wasn't just Tyra Banks being ridiculous in the 2000s. People called Britney Spears fat for being 5 pounds heavier than anorexic, and a major plot point of The Devil Wears Prada was calling Anne Hathaway fat when she's obviously not. However, the narrative gets crazy in the modern day when fat acceptance advocates are saying that a woman being under 180 pounds in a video game is an unrealistic standard. So this is not to say that some of the arguments that Anita Sarkeesian made weren't reasonable. Some of them were, which is why they caught people's attention. I've already stated in a different video that over-sexualization in media is a problem. Considering all the porn addiction going around, I don't think video games should be loaded with softcore content as a way of baiting people into buying the game. Over-sexualization is so prominent everywhere that it's genuinely hard to avoid. Just trying to watch a popular superhero show with anime Superman, don't forget that annoying, rapey character who uses sexual assault as a form of comic relief, or the beach episode that sexualizes high schoolers. Now, that's not to say that these characters should be made ugly like they're doing in Western video games. Oddly, people have pointed out that they aren't making the men ugly, but maybe, just maybe, the sexualized content should be toned down a bit in mainstream shows. I think that this stuff should be kept separate from pornography. You don't need to constantly throw people into the Twitch to OnlyFans pipeline just to appeal to coomers who can't leave Pornhub for more than 5 minutes. Maybe just make a good game. Maybe just learn how to write female characters who aren't lame. Anita Sarkeesian is also correct about blank slate female characters who are just sex objects for the male protagonist. For example, here's a post I saw on Twitter of Anita retweeting and talking about the best pairings in media, which oddly includes this picture of Batman and Catwoman. Wait, didn't you make a whole series saying stuff like this is a problem? Specifically these two characters? But the original post contains Outlaw Star on the bottom right, which I think is a good show, but as an adult, the pairing between Jean and Melfina makes absolutely no sense. Jean tries to date basically every other female in the show while treating Melfina like crap. Their relationship is kind of just slapped together at the end with no prior romance, and Melfina's entire personality is that she has no personality.
Who am I and why am I here?
I have no idea. Watching this as an adult, you are literally the least interesting character on the show. It seems like Melfina's only purpose on Outlaw Star is to do chores and be the naked girl on the ship.
I've never seen a ship like this before. It's way behind any Kotaku ship. It won't move unless you're naked. Oh, that's very kinky, wouldn't you say?
How dare you talk about the galaxy's fastest, most advanced ship like that?
People draw a cultural narrative from the stories they watch and listen to, which is why woke people are hijacking classic movies and remaking them to be garbage instead of making their own original stories. The purpose of all this is to change the cultural narrative. You can cope all you want, but the media that you consume does affect your psychology. It's specifically designed to do that, and people who make art do so to influence you through emotional means. It's not always nefarious, though. It's mostly because you won't find the art interesting if it doesn't do that. With that said, when you have a media culture like anime or video games that constantly portrays women chasing men, despite the fact that women rarely chase men in real life, or you have a bunch of shows where the main female love interest has a personality centered entirely around liking the male protagonist, such as Hinata, Ochako, or Mikasa, then you might have a strong contributor to a whole group of people called incels who have very unrealistic ideas of how women actually act. But don't take my word for it, research how Japanese society is going. And I'm not kidding with how common of a trope this is in Japanese media. There's a whole genre where loads of women chase male characters who outwardly have to mention that they're a virgin, called isekai, and people are so lonely that every season they make like 20 of these transported to another world power fantasy harem shows. Speaking of Final Fantasy, the remake staff decided that 2 women and a 16-year-old chasing Cloud wasn't enough, so they took a character who dies in the first 10 minutes of the original game and gave her a whole side plot based on her chasing the main character and doing stuff that no real woman would actually do.
And now for the cherry on top.
Okay, I get it. Mind letting me breathe?
Depends. Mind coming over tomorrow night? My roommates should all be out for a while.
Are you seriously that desperate? Just let go already.
Only if you promise to come back tomorrow night. Deal?
Gross. Then they end her character arc with this scene here. Can we not see how this shot might take away from the drama of a character death? Actually, to Outlaw Star's credit, even though Jean and Melfina's relationship makes no sense, at least Jean actually acts like a man in that show, instead of an emotionless autistic incel who gets chased around by every female in the game.
You said men today want to get chased? Okay, call the police on the man.
So I don't think that men growing up with one-dimensional female characters who don't act like real women is good for their mental health, just like I don't think feminist Mary Sue characters are good for women either. Characters need to have depth and aspirations and flaws, and different sides of their personality need to be shown during the plot, particularly the ones that you're trying to pair up in the story. The ironic thing is that if you actually did the difficult thing and did a good job writing these female characters, then you get beloved titles like Princess Mononoke or Nausicaa, or Avatar: The Last Airbender. And damn it, that show had a beach episode. But at least it was a good episode that added personality and depth to the Fire Nation characters that made you sympathize with the villains, instead of just being an abject fan service filler episode. But feminism, to some extent, is correct about a lot of male writers making women blank slate sex objects because they don't know how to write female characters, and if that's the case, then we would actually have a use for a consulting company like Sweet Baby Inc. that would benefit society. Is that how it's playing out in reality? Well, no, it's all just a grift. But I think if you don't try to steelman these people's arguments, then you'll fail to understand why so many people get attached to crazy and stupid ideas. It's really difficult to start something like that off without bringing up some sort of real problem that at least some people can connect to. And it's not like there isn't a place for sexuality in media, but I think constant porn-brained fan service in the place of good storytelling and good character development is bad for people and media in general. Leave that stuff for adult websites. That being said, how do we keep ESG funding out of games? Well, like everything else in media, you need to have people who understand base principles in psychology so they know what people are actually attracted to. And what that fundamentally means is that many game companies are spending massive amounts of money on stuff that people don't care about that much, such as hyper-realistic graphics in every game, instead of focusing on what actually matters, which is the gameplay. It's kind of the same issue that I see on YouTube where other creators will be bothered that I can lazily throw up a bunch of stock images on screen and still hit hundreds of thousands to millions of views per video. It's because the fancy edits don't matter. The writing is what people actually care about. Now, fancy editing and hyper-realistic graphics do help, but not at the sacrifice of gameplay, good writing, and adherence to base principles and psychology. Graphics can be used to enhance the gaming experience, but they should never be the main course. Which brings us to this interesting video that I saw from Moon Channel called, "Why Doesn't the Industry Make Good Girls Games?" These days, everyone and their grandmother in the gaming industry is talking about how we need to get more girls playing Call of Duty and Fortnite, to which I honestly think is just lazy rebranding, because the games are too expensive to not include women as prospective buyers, and the gaming industry does not actually know how to market to women. But I think Moon Channel's video on this is a good chance to point out basic psychological principles that people are attracted to through his comments on girl games. For example, this commentary on horse games.
But why then does the industry largely treat girls' games like shovelware? Where are all the quality games for girls, and of the ones that exist, why are small, usually indie developers the ones making the most quality girls' games? Sometimes the best way to make a great game for girls is just to make a realistic, high-quality game about girly subjects without making the presentation overly gendered. Sometimes that really is just what girls want. And that's why the best horse game is arguably Red Dead Redemption 2. And I happen to know that there are many horse girl gamers who play Red Dead Redemption 2 or Red Dead Online because there are so many different breeds of horses you can befriend, and they act relatively realistically. I mean, the heads could use a little work and the gaits are a little rigid in the joints, but don't worry about that. In Red Dead Redemption 2 and Red Dead Online, your horse has a personality. You can ride it past scenic vistas and take beautiful screenshots of you and your companion. You can be friends with your horse in a meaningful way. And one of the most important fundamental joys of equestrianism, of horses, is the open plain and the wind in your horse's mane. And that does not require and is not bettered by a gendered portrayal.
I think a part of pointing out that Red Dead Redemption is one of the best horse simulators, despite obviously being a game for males, is that there's a sort of compromise that games can make in basic psychology to attract new players to a game who wouldn't have originally played it, as well as finding a middle ground that will cause both men and women to like an intellectual property, which will boost sales. A show that did that well was Inuyasha, which was a fighting anime with power-ups and rivalries for the guys, but on the girls' end, it's a romance story with an ultra-powerful guy who's like part werewolf and stays young forever. For women, it basically hits a lot of the same tropes that Twilight does, so there's a reason why that show was popular. So what you do then is take all the things that boys like and take all the things that girls like and try to create games around those base psychological wants. If you have spent any time in sales or marketing, then you should know that this stuff is already well established and not a mystery. When it comes to video games, women like raising animals, playing dress-up, romance or matchmaking, puzzles, horror, point-and-click adventures, and farming. You can make games that specialize in each of these categories like Nintendogs, which was one of the best-selling games on Nintendo DS, or you can take a game that combines these genres to make something more creative. So if you want a game where you can play with animals, solve puzzles, and choose different outfits, then you can play Zelda Breath of the Wild. There's a reason why so many women like Zelda games. If you want to play Matchmaker and farm, you have Stardew Valley. And if you want to raise animals, change outfits, enter beauty pageants, and decorate your room, then you can play Pokemon. One of the benefits of taking time to market games that are actually made for women is instead of saying that girls need to play games like Rainbow Six Siege, which is in one of the categories that is the least interesting to women, is that games like Pokemon, Zelda, and Stardew Valley all have cartoonish designs that are much cheaper to make than the newest top-of-the-line AAA game. Women in general don't need super high-performance games and don't care about things like how many frames per second a game runs in. On that note, I thought that this point here from Moon Channel was very interesting.
In 1996, Mattel released one of the magnum opuses of girls' games, Barbie Fashion Designer, on the PC. Barbie Fashion Designer took the market by storm and in many ways was the vanguard of the girls' games movement that would follow. The game looks primitive by modern standards, but it was arguably the first thoughtfully developed dress-up game, and it obliterated the idea that there was no market for girls' games. Barbie Fashion Designer was the 9th best-selling PC game of 1996, a year which featured competition like Quake 1, Civilization 2, Command & Conquer Red Alert, Diablo, and Duke Nukem 3D. Barbie Fashion Designer sold more than 500,000 copies in its first 2 months, outselling Quake and even Doom.
The great thing is that I imagine that this Barbie game cost almost nothing to produce in comparison to the games that it outperformed. So generally, women don't care about all the high-end graphics. They care about stuff like the Pokemon games getting their color theory right, and that the starter Pokemon are cute and made of round shapes. This is a largely untapped market that big companies outside of Nintendo don't really seem to be investing in. The most you'll get is like a character customizer in mainstream games, or like a costume designer in games like Tekken 8, which is a nice way to get female players interested, but competitive fighting games don't fully cater to the interests of women. This is important to note because what very well could save us from the need for stuff like ESG funding is mainstream companies getting good at producing good, low-cost girl games that sell well enough to fund the more expensive games that guys want to play. Now, you would also have to not stupidly dump all that extra revenue onto your CEO and instead reinvest it into the company, but I digress. Game companies should stop trying to make every game a graphical masterpiece at the expense of making a game that's actually fun to play.
Dad, that's the beginning of The Last of Us.
That was just the beginning?
That's the thing. It sets a story. You're so impatient with stuff.
You don't need that. Just start some stuff up and let me press a button and do things. I'm telling you, they need to hire me.
I mean, surely
nobody wants to watch this setup crap, do they?
Yes, I think that is a brilliant opening to the game.
If I want to watch a movie, I'd watch a movie.
I have no idea where this clip came from, but this dad is my spirit animal. I cannot stand it when modern games open up with like 45-minute cutscenes or send you down a very linear path at the start and try to pretend it's gameplay.
We play old games because new games fucking suck, man.
They do. They're like so poorly optimized. The character designs are terrible. They're like interactive movies now for the most part.
I hate cutscenes so much, man. And what I hate as well is quick time events and stuff like that, where it's like press a certain button at a certain time. It's like, that's just not how I want a game to be.
It's like some way to con you into believing it's gameplay, really.
Yeah.
Exactly. This makes new video games a pain in the ass to get into. The cutscenes are probably expensive to produce, and I think long opening cutscenes actually turn a big portion of the audience off without attracting an adequate amount of people who are into that stuff to replace them. Gaming companies need to spend more time getting the psychology correct. They should learn what things men like, learn what things women like, and design games that are fun to play around those psychological wants. Anyway, thanks for watching, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.